In 1983, grocery shopping was not a digital experience. When you walked through the doors of a supermarket, you stepped into a world completely disconnected from data streams, algorithms, and automated efficiency. There were no flashing self-checkout screens, no digital loyalty cards tracking your purchases, and no automated inventory systems silently predicting your next choice. Everything you saw, touched, and heard was grounded in the physical world. It was a space designed for humans, operated by humans, and paced by the natural rhythm of physical movement. Today, we look back at this era not just with nostalgia, but with a strange sense of wonder. To a modern observer, the supermarket of 1983 might look slow, even inefficient. But back then, nobody felt they were losing time. Every visit to the store felt unique, slightly unpredictable, and deeply connected to the community around it. It was a routine, yes, but it was a shared, human routine. The journey began long before you reached the aisles. It started in the parking lot. In 1983, American parking lots were filled with a distinct landscape of automobiles. You would see heavy wood-paneled station wagons, boxy sedans, and massive steel family cars. People rarely shopped alone in a rush after a remote workday. Grocery shopping was a designated family event, a weekly ritual, usually scheduled for Thursday evening or Saturday morning. As families stepped out of their cars, the first sound that welcomed them was the unmistakable, metallic clatter of shopping carts. These carts were built differently back then. They were heavy, constructed from solid chrome-plated steel, without the smooth plastic wheels we have today. They rattled loudly against the uneven concrete, a mechanical symphony that instantly signaled the beginning of the chore. There was an absence of urgency in the air. People didn't check their wrists for smart notifications, nor did they rush to optimize their time down to the exact minute. They adjusted their coats, greeted neighbors they recognized, and walked toward the entrance when they were ready. As you approached the entrance, heavy automatic sliding doors pushed open with a loud pneumatic hiss. Immediately, you were hit by a very specific sensory environment. The air inside a 1983 grocery store had its own identity. It was a mixture of freshly waxed linoleum floors, the earthy scent of the produce section, and occasionally, a faint hint of tobacco smoke. Yes, smoking sections was still a common reality in many public indoor spaces. Above you, rows of long fluorescent light tubes illuminated the store. This lighting wasn't perfectly calibrated like the warm, theatrical LEDs used today. It was bright, slightly harsh, and carried a low, almost imperceptible hum. Sometimes, a single bulb would flicker in the corner, an accepted imperfection of the era. You looked up to find your way using massive, hand-painted or printed plastic signs hanging from the ceiling. Aisle 3, canned vegetables and soups. Aisle 4, baking goods and flour. There were no digital directories, no apps to map out your route, and no personalized discounts waiting for you. You relied entirely on physical organization, clear signage, and your own memory. Walking down the aisles in 1983 was a completely different visual experience. Product packaging relied on bold, loud typography and high-contrast color schemes to catch the eye. On the cereal shelves, iconic boxes of Cheerios, Frosted Flakes, and Captain Crunch featured bright, saturated illustrations that stood out without the aid of modern matte finishes or minimalist branding. The frozen food section was much smaller than what we see today. In 1983, frozen TV dinners in aluminum trays and frozen concentrate orange juice cans was still considered relatively modern conveniences. They carried a slight sense of novelty, packed tightly behind thick, fogged-up glass freezer doors that you had to pull open with a heavy chrome handle. But the most striking difference was the pricing. If you picked up a can of soup, you wouldn't find a barcode printed cleanly on the back for a laser to read. Instead, every single item on the shelf had its price manually stamped on the top. Store clerks spent hours walking the aisles with mechanical ink stampers, clicking a purple or red ink price directly onto the lid of every can and box. If a price changed, they had to stick a new paper label over the old one or use a solvent to wipe the old ink away. It was a monumental amount of manual labor, visible on every single product you touched. The concept of a barcode scanner did exist in 1983, but it was far from universal. The technology, introduced by companies like IBM and NCR, was incredibly expensive. Only the largest, most profitable supermarket chains could afford to install laser scanners at the checkout counters. For the vast majority of local grocery stores, the checkout process remained entirely manual. When you reached the front of the store, you placed your items onto a black rubber conveyor belt. The cashier didn't slide the items over a glass window. Instead, they looked at the top of every item, read the stamped ink price with their eyes, and manually typed the numbers into a heavy mechanical cash register. Clack, 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 ding. The cashier's fingers moved with incredible speed and muscle memory, a skill developed through thousands of hours of repetition. If an item lacked a price stamp, everything stopped. The cashier would lift a microphone and call out across the store intercom, "Price check on aisle 4, generic brand peanut butter." You waited patiently. The people behind you waited patiently. Nobody complained or sighed in frustration. This was simply the accepted reality of how things worked. Because the technology was slow, the checkout line became a natural social square. People didn't pull out smartphones to escape the boredom of waiting. Instead, they flipped through physical magazines like TV Guide, People, or the National Enquirer displayed on wire racks right next to the register. Or, quite simply, they talked. Strangers would comment on the weather, discuss local news, or share recipes based on what they saw in each other's shopping carts. Children stood by their parents' sides, begging for a pack of bubble yum or a comic book, their requests handled with face-to-face parenting, rather than the distraction of a digital tablet. Teenagers working their first jobs as baggers would carefully pack your groceries into heavy brown paper bags, asking you politely if you wanted paper or plastic. They would then offer to wheel the heavy cart out to your car, a standard level of customer service that required actual human conversation and eye contact. Behind the scenes, the entire operation relied on paper and human coordination. When it came time to pay, there were no debit cards or wireless phone payments. You paid with cash, or you pulled out a paper checkbook. The cashier would wait as you carefully wrote out the exact amount, signed your name, and handed it over. Coupons were another major manual operation. Shoppers spent Sunday mornings clipping paper coupons out of the local newspaper. At the register, these coupons were handed over in a physical stack. The cashier had to manually subtract each discount from the total, and at the end of the shift, all those thousands of little pieces of paper had to be sorted, counted, and mailed back to the manufacturers for reimbursement. Receipts were printed mechanically. Stocking the shelves required the same level of physical effort. Managers didn't look at an iPad to see inventory levels. They walked the floors with a clipboard and a pencil, counting the missing boxes of laundry detergent by hand, relying on experience and intuition to place the next order. Today, almost all of this world has disappeared, swept away by the relentless pursuit of speed, data optimization, and frictionless automation, replaced by speed, automation, and silent transactions. But the structure remains familiar. We still walk down aisles. We still fill our carts. We still buy the food that sustains our families. Only the texture of the experience has shifted. For those who lived through it and remember the bright fluorescent lights of 1983, that world never felt slow. It didn't feel outdated. It simply felt human.